are in for a real treat, a real acceleration. And Dan is not only a genius, he's actually a very, very nice guy. He's been very kind to me. I visited him a couple of times in Europe. He just opened up his home and his knowledge. And Dan, are you there? Do you want to come into the room? There you are, Dan. Let's get him unmuted. Unmute yourself.
Can you hear me? Hello. Hi, Ellen.
Hey, it's been a while, Dan.
You're looking younger. I hope I am too.
You are looking pretty good. Are you still at the beautiful paradise with the fresh water flowing by?
Yeah, we're moved up the hill here. It's even more beautiful. We're just very lucky and grateful. Thank you. Yes.
Well, thank you for being so kind during my visits. And, you know, you're so abundant with information. And I know you have a presentation here. And I just say to you, just take it a little slow because your concepts are so advanced that, you know, it takes me 10 minutes to digest one sentence that you say, you know, so it's like, I know you have a lot to present, but, you know, do you mind if I just interrupt you once in a while to ask you to explain a concept? Because it's just, I want people to get this because this is the next level of our technological and spiritual manifestation, what you have the answers to here. So I want people to absorb as much as possible. What are you going to talk about today?
Yes, well, thank you. And I appreciate your caring. Let's make it simple. And your questions are important, of course, sir. Okay. And the subject is the real science of what ascension means, the next dimension, and how that results in ability to lucid dream and take memory through death. It's called longitudinal EMF. That's the science of ascension, the real electrical science.
Beautiful. I love this. This is exactly what Portal to Ascension is. So you're going to open the portal for us today, right here, Dan. Okay.
It's literally about portals, actually quite literally, yes. In fact, the physics of how stargates work if we get there.
Great. Okay, you have probably till let's see, and 50 minutes. Is that good?
Yeah. So the format here is about 10 minutes of intro and stories, and then there's a bunch of visuals, which we can go through quickly. And your questions, I'm sure, will make it more pointed. Please, let's do it.
And questions from everyone online in the chat room and on YouTube, everywhere. Just, you know, we'll try to get to as many as possible. So Great. Buckle in, and we're about to blast off. Okay.
I've opened the chat window here so I can see questions too. It's all good. So, you know, the New Age woo-woos have been talking about what they call ascension for a long time. And it's not that much difference from what the Christians call the rapture, and you do not want to be the left behind. And during the rapture, the guns will melt. And we actually know the physics because, in fact, metal things like guns have the wrong dielectric and will generate heat when the charge compression reaches the next dimension, which is to say longitudinally compressed. So when the charge gets dense, when the spin gets dense, only charge distribution efficiency works. And our words heaven, hey, ave, the breath of life taking flight, and plains of Sharon, these are all actually names for charge distribution efficiency, which obviously in the end is fractal. And
wait, can you back up 1 second? Charge distribution. So you mean when a combustion engine, let's just take it simply industrial for a second. Can you talk about, in simple terms, charge distribution?
Well, actually, when we talk about charge distribution, we're saying the universe is comprised of a single contiguous compressible medium, and some say call it ether, but in fact the ether is simply plus and minus charge, which is the compression and rarefaction of the ether, which is simply a superfluid. So that distribution of that electric charge to make that efficient is the physics, for example, of abundance and fractal economics and heaven. And it's where you go when you go to the next dimension. It's where you go when you ascend. And to enter that realm, in science, it's called longitudinal EMF interferometry, the efficient distribution of compression waves. A simple example is when Bruce Cathy measured that at the Earth grid magnetic line cross points, the same place where cathedrals and labyrinths and Agnihotra work, and Kozyrev mirrors make telepathy. At those nodes of magnetic line cross points of the Earth grid, the nuclear radioactive critical mass is dramatically reduced. And the physics for that is about compression. So at those nodes, which it turns out we know the Earth grid is dodecacosa, that's called fractal in 3D, our famous Star Mother kit here being an example of the only possible actual three-dimensional fractal.
That's the Earth grid you're saying? That is the Earth grid, what you just showed us?
Yeah, the Earth grid is clearly a stellated dodecacosa. Everybody agrees, anti-gravity in the world grid and Kathy on down. And the reason the Earth grid is dodecacosa is because the longitudinal compression waves are embedded at those nodes, and we'll have some pictures of that. So
what do you mean by longitudinal compression? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to get that.
That's appropriate. Well, you know, maybe we need to dig up the pictures before we finish the intro here. But it's the right question. Most of our electromagnetic communications, everything you use, your Wi-Fi and your radio and your internet, they use the transverse component of the electromagnetic wave, which is simply the up and down component. Whereas the compressional component of that wave, sometimes incorrectly called scalar or torsional wave, is called longitudinal electromagnetics. And that compression wave, physics pretty much doesn't know how to use, because that's kind of what makes gravity waves. And it's because physics doesn't understand that, like Einstein, that they don't understand action at a distance. It's the nodal interferometry of longitudinal EMF, which is the physics of everything that has to do with spiritual stories, whether it's lucid dreaming or surviving death. You need to enter a longitudinal array of compression nodes of charge coherently, what the Egyptians called the Ba from the Ka, or what Gurdjieff called the Kesjan body, in order to take memory through death and communicate with ancestors and lucid dream. And that is all about longitudinal interferometry. And let's regard your question, Alan, as not answered until I get to the pictures, okay? Because then we'll understand more about this longitudinal array. But just to give you an idea how practical this is, if you take our famous Therify.net plasma rejuvenation tech, which is successful in 25 countries, it reduces pain, all kinds of stuff. It's amazing. Stories are incredible. Termination of seed, all kinds of stuff. But the recent reports from Paris and Athens, for example, dramatic increase in ability to lucid dream. And we know why. We know the physics. It's not a mystery. The same way we have hundreds of stories now of successful healing at a distance. And this is all about propagating a coherent longitudinal electromagnetic. For example, when you want to heal someone at a distance, if both the sender and receiver are at an Earth grid magnetic line cross point, then that healing is more likely. And if it's done at sunrise and sunset, is more likely. And the physics is because when those charge lines converge perpendicularly, the same way lasers have to be in a square to phase conjugate and make time reversal and negentropy. So that square arrangement of waves, what Aboriginals or natives would have called the sacred four directions, is actually the beginning of the physics of phase conjugation, charge implosion, and all that good stuff. So basically, the reason we're able to help people lucid dream and therefore take memory through death, because that's about the major predictor of whether you will take memory through death, is if you can lucid dream, which is propagate coherent longitudinal EMF to make your body radiate your aura in that ascended dimension. And that successful doing of that compression of harmonics, which is the only physics of bliss and successful death, is indicated by the fact that successful death clearly requires an electrical black hole. The reason you see lattice cobweb tunnel spiral, the geometry of what everyone sees when they die, we know exactly why, because your DNA is trying to assemble that necessary black hole in order to propagate your magnetics coherently in that longitudinal array, which, depending on what tradition you come from, could be called collective unconscious or ancestor memory or communion of saints, or the Akashic records, many names for the same physics, which is a coherent longitudinal array. So this was what the Egyptians called the Ba from the Ka, and we're going to talk about that grid in the Kathy with pictures. We have Agnihotra stories, you know, why does Agnihotra only work at those cross-point nodes? And
do you want to answer one question? Propagating longitudinal waves supports healing, basically, is what you're saying.
Yes, because think of this. We know that all restoration of negentropy, which is the physics of what's called healing, for example, Priori, ancestor of Therify, all initiation of negentropy, self-organization, which is, say, healing, begins when the compression waves arrive symmetrically from the correct directions, and it starts with a cube and ends with a dodeca. When those compression waves, which are called longitudinal, arrive symmetrically enough to restore centripetal force, which is to say implosion at the Planck threshold where the transverse component goes to longitudinal, the good stuff comes out the toothpaste tube, as it were. And a prime example is why the first nuclear device was called the implosion. They had to get enough compression coming from symmetrical directions at once to initiate centripetal force. And it always starts centripetal before it becomes centrifugal, and your aura is no exception. So initiating that, and again, the pictures will be of great help here. So I think we want to drag out the pictures. But
right, that's a good basis platform, though. Go ahead.
Yes. Oh, so, but to finish the last 2 minutes of the verbal intro and then the pictures. Okay. The last 2 minutes are then, so it resolves to this quintessential problem, which I have been complaining about for half of my lifetime, that your physics teacher, Einstein, NASA, and Stephen Hawking, are too stupid to tell your children why an object falls to the ground, and therefore they can't tell them the way through death, and they can't tell them the origin of any centripetal force like gravity, life force, and consciousness. So that's a bit of a problem, and I'm working on that. And so the answer to that is very simple, and we're going to use the example of the moment when the CIA decided to murder the Secretary of State rather than admit to the Americans that they lost the war to the Nazis, and they did. And the reason they lost the war to the Nazis, and the Nazis took over the South Pole, kicked Admiral Byrd out, and then took over Ceres outside of Jupiter. It's a disaster story. The Nazis won, sorry. And the reason they won, and I'm a little upset about this, is because people do not understand exactly what I'm going to tell you right now. So here's the physics. The physics was, well, I'm going to find my donut. Oh, here's my donut. Sure. The physics was that the Nazis had this lady, Maria Orsic, and she explained to them how to use a mercury vortex, previously known as the Vimana, later known as the Nazi Bell and the Haunebu. And that mercury vortex had a shape just like this, sometimes called the flame letter. And the reason that mercury vortex made gravity is the answer to this whole problem that your physics teacher cannot explain to your child why an object falls to the ground. The reason your physics teacher cannot explain is because they don't understand this, which Schauberger knew very well, that if you initiate, for example, piezoelectric water in this vortex, and we have pictures in a minute, that water, piezoelectric water, or in the case of the Nazi Bell Vimana, it was a iron powder doped red mercury liquid, so that you had both the inertial density of the mercury liquid hydrodynamically making gravity combined with the inertia of the magnetic flux density enabled by the doped mercury iron powder in the red mercury, famous red liquid. So that vortex is going down this spiral and it's gaining speed as it moves towards center. And the name for the physics of that wave of charge that gains speed as it moves towards center, because if the vortex is perfect, it adds and multiplies by golden mean ratio, which allows adding, multiplying recursively of the heterodynes of phase velocity, which turns compression into acceleration towards center, named the gravity. So the cause of gravity is fractality. Most physicists already figured that out. They just don't know what a fractal field is, so they don't know why objects fall to the ground. But anyway, once you understand why that charge gained inertia going toward the center, whether it's a water vortex or a mercury vortex or a Nazi Bell or a Vimana, then you don't have to let the Nazis win the war. Hello? Because you know why these devices made gravity, because you know how gravity is made. And now that happens to be the physics, that particular shape is called the flame letter. It's the golden mean spiral superposed on the self-organizing torus. And I wrote the equation to animate the origin of the Hebrew and Sanskrit alphabets from just that same spiral. And you look at it from the shadows of the tetrahedron and you have Hebrew.
Doesn't Nassim talk about this as far as gravity being one aspect of electromagnetism being the way out of the torus? I mean, I don't want to go
yeah, but we're a lot more specific. We actually wrote the equation for hydrogen to prove that hydrogen's fractality based on golden ratio from the hydrogen radii, stellated to Planck. Again, the pictures are coming up, that the squirt gun through the speed of light at the Planck threshold is where the transverse electromagnetic earth inertia propagates to longitudinal waves, sometimes called gravity waves. And if you want to know that longitudinal waves are gravity waves, get the book. Tom Bearden, he wrote the book, Gravitational Biology. The equations are there. It's very clear. Maxwell started on it. Tom Bearden finished it. I'm just doing the crude little intro here. The point is that once you know why that spiral makes gravity, then, and this is the climax phrase of the 10-minute intro, and then we get pictures, then you know what ascension is. Because when you see that those radii of hydrogen, which I proved are golden ratio fractal, are the squirt gun at the center of every ladder rung codon of DNA's recursively braided imploding helix, the squirt gun gets more broad spectral in its phase conjugation. And that propagation from longitudinal gets to be a very big pine cone kissing noses. Because the longer waves embedded in the braid within the braid of the braid of the DNA, which is what's happening when your DNA implode braids in this response to human bliss required for successful death, for example.
Then, and also the awakening of Kundalini, right? Because you're sort of an expert.
That's exactly where we're going, precisely. And we have all the physics for this. We have the spectrum analysis of the phonon waves of the sacrocranial pump, which is the physics of Kundalini. And if your sacrocranial pump is pumping, it's clinically impossible to be depressed. So you see why that is ascension, because then your body has compressed, imploded the necessary coherent longitudinal propagation. You have ascended already, you know, like those damn Pleiadians who are bragging, we're 5D and you humans are never going to be. Well, they didn't once tell you what the physics are. And I am telling you right now what the physics of ascension and how to become 5D is. And that's
right. And we also have the pine cone. You mentioned the pine cone,
exactly.
Which is like right inside of the brain. Just mention that a little bit. Go ahead.
Well, you know, about half the pictures are full of pine cones. So I thought,
then go ahead. Let's look at your pictures. You know about
and this was the point in the conversation where we went to pictures, supposedly. Anyway, so can you see my screen now? Is it there?
I see your screen. Yes. Yes. What's your website? Someone's asking, what's your best website?
Well, yes, actually, it's right at the top here, fractalfield.com.
Okay, great.
We have 100 websites, but they all start at fractalfield.com. And what is a fractal field? That's what this is about. Every physicist agrees fractality causes gravity, but not one physicist has asked what's a fractal electrical field. And I happen to have answered that question, which is Planck times integer exponential golden ratio. Anyway, so golden ratio, which is called phase conjugation, the conjugation of phases, is the cause of gravity and therefore black holes and the origin of negentropy. And that's the title of my book, The Origin of Biologic Negentropy. We might even have it.
Let me just slow you down for 1 second, Dan. I'm just trying to, golden ratio means phi ratio, which is the ratio of life propagation. Would you say that?
Well, golden ratio 0.6181, 1.618, 2.618 is the only possible infinite harmonic series in which you can both add and multiply each two numbers together. And that infinite perfected recursion generates the only possible three-dimensional fractal. And we'll see the animation of that in the Grail animation we have. And that
also generates life, isn't it also a life equation?
Yes. Okay. And in effect, it's the XYZ coordinate of every vertex in this array is simple harmonic of multiple golden ratio. And you ratchet that and you have a full three-dimensional model of DNA braiding and implosion and bliss. So yeah, it's Earth grid, DNA, zodiac, and I was first one to prove it is literally the structure of hydrogen, which we sell this kit as a model for the physics of the radii of hydrogen, since I invented the new equation to prove that.
Okay.
So it's, in general, the geometry of fractality, and therefore perfected compression, and therefore perfected implosion, therefore perfected negentropy, and that's how you squeeze down that pine cone. So we wanted to look at some of these pictures, and I just said in the intro, it's because Einstein, your physics teacher, couldn't tell your kid, you know, why an object falls to the ground. That's the reason your physics teacher also cannot tell your kid how anything becomes self-centripetal or self-organizing. And that's why your physics teacher is lying to your child, saying the universe is condemned to entropy. When the opposite is the case, there's a way out of entropy. It's called life and consciousness itself, which is generated precisely when you phase conjugate and charge implode. So that's what this is all about, healing. And this is about 4D, 5D in the next dimension. So on this slide is the summary of what I just said. The number of axes of spin symmetry of charge which are superposed coherently, the only actual definition of how many dimensions are you in, which shows up literally in the number of harmonics in the power spectra of your EKG, for example, which is the only real medical way to measure your immune health, is that harmonic inclusiveness in your heart rate variability, which is fractal heart is healthier.
Do you think science will ever create a term that besides negative entropy? That's such a negative way of saying life, isn't it?
Well, I like that. I agree with your attitude. I think that's a very constructive point you just made. It is like negentropy means self-organization. So in physics, the first time negentropy or self-organization was measured was when they phase conjugated optics, and the lasers had to meet in an angstrom perfect cube. And in the center, there's a phase conjugate mirror, which is the key to how the reflective surface worked in Nostradamus's scrying cup and John Dee's communication with angels. It's all about, or the obsidian mirrors in which the Olmec communicated with ancestors. It's all about phase conjugate mirrors. And the key is the super high dielectric constant of the barium titanate, which is the phase conjugate mirror. It's basically Dodecke implosion. It's the charge permission distribution environment. The super high dielectrics, for example, the real reason why you must use biological material when you build a house and why metal in your house will pretty much kill you is because the dielectric constant is wrong and charge distribution is not enabled. And that's why metal school buildings destroy the souls of your children.
Right.
So this is a little intro to this idea. And by the way, it's a bad picture. Supposedly it was supposed to be a picture of ball lightning, but I was told later it's probably not a good picture of ball lightning. But anyway, many people have documented that ball lightning, which we now know is a plasma toroid,
right,
responds very well to telepathy. And the physics of why ball lightning is, so the question is, if you see ball lightning or a child crossing the road unsafely, what do? You talk to it. And the ball lightning will listen, it will hear you, it will communicate. And the physics of why that ball lightning communicates so well is that implosion at the center of the toroid, where it's propagating longitudinal coherence, the DNA radio, as it were, by which telepathy works, quite literally. So that's intro. So these are some of the other websites, fractalfield.com. Therify.net is our 25-country plasma tech that's doing rejuvenation around the world. Started with Prairie, and now the stories are incredible. We're helping people with all. It's very simple. If you make the plasma centripetal, and we're broadcasting a pine cone from opposite directions from plasma cones, and we're making magic. And there's more pictures, so we won't go into it here. goldenmean.info is the original site. Realheartcoherence.com, you can see all the EKG harmonics. So we can measure love, we can measure tantra, and heart coherence is literally a lie detector, and it works. It's all fun. iThrive.com, our HRV app, implosiongroup.com, our tech app, and fractalu.com, our educational. So the physics of the vacuum is that it's a superfluid, we just said, and the visual evidence of fractality is key to gravity. Examples of implementation of various zero-point technologies. Some of these slides were prepared for the lecture I did in Amsterdam, Breakthrough Energy Movement. So we're proving the structure of hydrogen reveals the very nature of zero-point energy, that is fractal. And once you understand how hydrogen makes gravity, you can know the cause of gravity. So the context of this is we're saying once you understand charge implosion, which is to say how you extract energy inertia from the vacuum, you have the solution to every zero-point energy device, every single one, and I present examples in this slideshow if we get that far. But this was the background of this slideshow originally prepared for the Amsterdam lecture on Breakthrough Energy Movement. The reason that it's relevant here, of course, is because that is precisely what we mean by ascension. You see, that the ability to set up an array, a symmetry array, for example, your DNA implosively braiding when you feel bliss, and your EKG harmonics are measurably, the phonons are measurably imploding your DNA by recursive braiding. So the physics of that charge implosion is the best example of a zero-point energy device on the planet, actually, Ascension. And further, when we look at the pictures of DNA, which are coming up here, we're going to insist that the recursive braiding possible in the DNA is, in physics, the structure in the universe which has the most number of dimensions, because it has the most number of possible superposed axes of spin superposed, and we'll get to that picture. So this is about electricity as a superfluid. We're talking about the fact that here's evidence from my theory of gravity being fractal, that when Raymond Chow famously measured the speed of the speeds faster than light, which Einstein was really pretty clueless about, all of his measurements proved that the speeds faster than light are between 1.5 and 1.7 times c, the speed of light, which obviously is centered around 1.618 golden ratio. And if it is proven true, the most number of measurements of speeds faster than light are golden ratio times the speed of light, that will be absolute proof that my theory of gravity caused by golden ratio is correct. So anyway, recursion perfected is fractality perfected, which is embedding perfected, which is self-similarity perfected, which is entanglement perfected, which is implosion perfected, which is phase conjugation, which is nesting, which is vacuum coherence, which is centripetal force, which is gravity produced, et cetera, et cetera. So we have so many names for the same thing, but it all starts with.
Wait, we can't really see that. What are you showing? Can you take it? You want to take it off screen share for a second, because it's a little hard to see the slinky you're playing with.
Okay, well, I've got a little donut. There, little donut and a big donut. Yeah. Okay, when the little donut embeds non-destructively in the big donut, that's called embeddability. And when it's golden ratio, you can nest perfectly and they can implode. And the mind, then you can exist within the mind of God. Okay. So this is going to lead to a definition of sacred space that, when Korotkov proved by measurement, he walked with the Kogi to where they made phone calls to ancestors and measured the fractality of the air, which is charge distribution efficiency, which is sacred space defined. And which is the same place that Kozyrev placed his mirrors, which is where they got the military quality telepathy, where all these Earth grid magnetic line cross points. And so that charge distribution efficiency enabled then points you to the solution to the next issue on the screen here, which is where Bruce Cathy measured nuclear critical mass was dramatically reduced at the longitudinal nodes on the Earth grid, which is Dodecki Cosa. And actually, that's the clue to how the Ark of the Covenant was a container to contain the nukes of the Anunnaki. And if you're an electrical engineer, you need to make a container to prevent radioactivity from escaping, and you understand charge implosion. That's what the Ark of the Covenant was. And so, so this gets to a description of the solution to the nature, the wave nature of mind itself. That imagine you're going to sleep and starting to dream, and you're on a ley line. You close your eyes and you can feel light go out the top of your head, and I, with years of Kundalini, can see through the top of my head. And I realize the light is going into an array, and I like to lay on the same ley line on the same mountain every time. And I can feel my mind becomes as big as that mountain. And I'm literally seeing through the mountain. And the physics of the reason I'm doing that is that I'm embedded in a longitudinal array. And that propagating array of coherent nodes becomes a holographic tool which makes vision, and I can see through it like a large lens, a perfected net of fireflies. So before you ask what a longitudinal wave is, and now we can do the...
Yes, I still, that is because that's sort of like the grounding of your whole thesis is understanding longitudinal waves. So I just want to get this so I can understand everything else.
Good. So do you see what a transverse wave is up top there? Yes, that's a transverse. It's nervous.
Transverse means an up and down motion, you know. Like
that's right. So the electric magnetic wave is doing. That's called transverse. Exactly. And now on the bottom, that is a longitudinal wave.
What are we seeing there? What are you seeing?
See, it depends on the sampling rate of your bandwidth, how fast you see the animation on the bottom of your screen. Is it moving a little bit on the bottom for you?
Yes, it's moving on the bottom. Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, good. Now, all sound waves propagate like that, longitudinal, but electromagnetic waves, physics hasn't learned to use that part of electromagnetic waves at all. Therefore, physics doesn't know how to do instant global communication. Physics doesn't understand lucid dreaming or how to go through death. And physics doesn't have a clue what action at a distance is. And that's why Einstein was dumb enough to call action at a distance spooky, because he didn't know what that was, because that's how gravity waves are made. So there you have on the bottom, that's a picture of a longitudinal electromagnetic wave. For example, practical example. When an earthquake causes a tsunami, that tsunami will start up top like this. Okay, so the earthquake on top started the wave going, no. When the earthquake starts, most of the inertia of the wave that can go faster than a jet flies across the ocean, the tsunami. Most of the inertia of that tsunami is traveling like the bottom picture, like a longitudinal wave, okay? Now, if you're a boat on the surface, as the tsunami goes underneath you, you do not know that it has passed you. However, when that longitudinal wave, compressional wave tsunami approaches the shore, at the shoreline, there is a half of a cone. The wave goes up a slope, and the compressional inertia has its vorticity translated from longitudinal to transverse. And so then at the shore, because it went up the half cone of the shoreline, once it reached the shore, suddenly it's going up and down, and then it can kill you.
Right. Wait, let me see if I understand this. So we have waves on the ocean. We can take a wave comes into the shore, could be a kind of longitudinal wave, but the actual current that generates the waves are not in the wave itself. It's in the, so that wave would be a transverse wave, but the energy that powers those waves is longitudinal. Is that right? Or am I
the bulk of the motion of the molecules in the water, in the tsunami going through the flat ocean, is longitudinal compressional like this. So at the surface, you see and feel nothing. Okay, now that longitudinal compressional tsunami wave reaches the shore and it goes up a half cone, and the compression wave has to translate vorticity, and it will then have that compression wave this way converted to start going up and down, become transverse, and then it's going to kill you. Okay, now that is the physics actually of how you can see someone at a distance. That's called longitudinal interferometry. When the compression waves meet at the nodes at a distance and they cross again, and the transverse component becomes heat containing. And that is the only solution to plasma containment to make fusion physics possible. So all these idiots who are going around there thinking we use a magnetic field to contain the heat for fusion are stupid. The physics is you have to use microwave longitudinal interferometry, and you can contain that heat beautifully without magnetics. And all fusion physics research on the planet needs to be reinvented today when they understand. Anyway.
But it's also happening in our bodies every second. When we activate the Kundalini, it's happening even at a greater rate. Would you say that?
Well, yes, it's true. And we want to get into more details of the wave mechanics of that in Kundalini here in a minute. But at least we're getting a better sense of this now, that the electromagnetic waves around us are mostly going up and down transverse because they're not ordered enough to travel efficiently compressionally. And they can only travel efficiently as a compression array when they're in these big rose-like fractal arrays, which is dodeca, stellated. And then the nodes of those arrays is where you can insert and retrieve information from that array at the nodes only. Kozyrev knew very well. His Kozyrev mirrors, these metal cylinders, microwave tune, only made this beautiful telepathy when you were at the earthquake magnetic. So this is the beginning of DNA radio and all the good stuff about how you communicate with ancestors and survive death. You propagate coherently that way, the Ba from the Ka, and that's what happens after you ascend, when that implosion. Now we want to show more pictures of how that implosion works, and that is the next slide.
Okay, what do we got here? How does the phase now? Can you just? I mean, I know you say it over and over again, and since I met you, you've been talking about it. Phase congregation, phase conjugation. Can you just slow down the definition so I can absorb every piece of that?
Yeah, actually, maybe let me just use a little different picture to
Okay.
talk about that exactly what conjugation is. So if you look at the top-down view, let's see, I've got all these lovely pictures. Let's pick one here that works kind of good. Okay, here's one. So
because I think that's so key. Okay, great.
So the second from the top, these two pictures here, the two pictures on the left, this center one here is a top-down view of DNA now, and every living protein. And so when these waves are crossing in golden mean ratio here, and I later wrote the equation to prove this is exactly the way hydrogen is built. So when these waves are adding and multiplying recursively, they're constructively adding and multiplying recursively. It's called phase conjugate heterodyning. To conjugate simply means to add and multiply recursively constructively, which is the only way waves can converge repeatedly. Because when waves converge, they both add and multiply, not just their wavelength, but their wave velocity. That's the only way wave interference happens. All other waves that interfere do so destructively. So the only way for waves to interfere constructively, recursively, is they have to both add and multiply recursively, constructively. And the golden mean ratio is the only geometric solution to that problem. That's why golden mean ratio and perfected phase conjugation are the same thing, because to conjugate means to add and multiply constructively. For example, when you get married and you conjugate your DNA with your lover, okay, we had conjugal relations. Well, the DNA got together and it added and multiplied and found out which DNA could propagate out of that implosive compression.
That's the best definition I ever heard you say of phase conjugation is marriage and children.
Yes, that's right.
Add and multiply.
We're talking about conjugal relations here, and this is not Playboy magazine. So, or it could be. So, but you see that the side view of what you have in there is this cone. It's a pine cone, and this is the path down DNA and the path down hydrogen, the path down implosion, path down phase conjugation. And when the waves travel down this pine cone, and here's the pine cone on the right, they add and multiply implosively. And here's a beautiful example. A well-built pine cone will actually make voltage from gravity. And it opens and closes slightly over the year to modulate the amount of energy it receives from gravity. It's a zero-point energy device. And by the way, it's a beautiful rainmaking tool for that reason. So this introduction of phase conjugation or charge implosion, the reason that works is that charge gained inertia, because when these waves added and multiplied recursively, constructively, not just their wavelength, but their phase velocity, then compression turned into acceleration towards center, named the gravity. So the reason that Schauberger's vortex and the Haunebu and the Mercury vortex make gravity is exactly right here, because in this geometry only, that charge can add and multiply recursively and turn compression into acceleration of charge towards center, named the gravity. So this is a pretty heavy thought. So phase conjugation causes gravity, and the reason this squirt gun works so good, and here's maybe it's the same picture, better thing, whatever. So, but the reason phase conjugation actually creates gravity at the Planck threshold was where we were going with the slide we left. We came here. There we go. So now we see that as this transverse wave entered here, right here on the left, it started traveling down the pine cone, and the inertia translated vorticity non-destructively. So what entered as up and down transverse EMS inertia on the left comes out the toothpaste tube, squirting exactly at the threshold defined by the Planck length and time. And from that perfected squirt gun propagates a longitudinal wave, sometimes named a gravity wave. And so that ability to turn transverse into longitudinal here later this is called making the great L. After you do this, you're an Elohim because you have your Ba from the Ka and you have your Kesjan body. You're longitudinally coherent and you begin to lucid dream. And now you can take something through death. Until then, no. And this is a graph of the physics of how ascension happens in the electric field propagating from your DNA during bliss and during the implosive compression, which is the black hole of successful dying. So this graphic now, I'd like to ask you to keep that in mind now when we bring up the pictures of DNA braid recursively implosion in the phonon EKG geometry of human bliss. So how did I do on defining phase conjugation? Was that better?
That was better. I'm starting to get it. You know, I think I have to listen to this video a couple of times, but, you know, I think the concepts are so complex and sort of you're breaking down biology into scientific terms and defining life as the as an essential part of creation and the unlocking of consciousness as the expression of that life. And so we're figuring out sort of the answers to creation right here, would you say?
Yes. And when we can propagate a coherent longitudinal electromagnetic body, then we can do portals and stargates, and we can introduce the concept of time travel. It starts here. In the physics, the first time phase conjugation was invented and physics measured time reversal and self-organization and negentropy, when they brought 4 lasers together exactly like this, the magic was that in the center of the phase conjugate mirror, like the coating on Nostradamus' scrying cup, was a phase conjugate mirror, which is the super high dielectric implosive capacitance charge permissive environment, barium strontium titanate, for example, that allowed the charge waves to implode, converge at the nano level, and that perfected implosive compression allowed the pine cones to kiss noses, exquisite perfection at the Planck threshold. And there, the compression was so perfect, it became implosive. And it then communicated with the galaxy of fractal longitudinal wave compresses, just like Jodie Foster emerging from her dodecahedron in the movie Contact and saying she radioed her grandfather.
Would you say you know how to build a portal based on that physics?
Absolutely, sure, no problem.
And you have built portals.
I mean, essentially, if you take what is our therapy, which is broad spectral phase conjugation, we'll see pictures in a moment. We're working in 25 countries. And you make it even more broad spectral and phase accurate, and you align it and do a few of the little tweaks. And basically, the more broad spectral the phase conjugation, the more effective is the squirt gun. And that's otherwise known as a Stargate. That's why the letters used in the movie Stargate were the Ophanim-Enochian letters, which is a superset of tetracube hypercube, which is the angel alphabet, because it's angling the plasma toroids to go into that perfect implosion cone to make what's called a Stargate. So yes, we know exactly what that is. And the planet might get ready later, but in the meantime, let's start here. Basically, successful death is a pretty good introduction to that question for physicists.
What does that mean? What does successful death mean when you ascend, or what does that mean to you?
In other words, if you're propagating your attention coherently in a longitudinal array, what the Aboriginal elder is, you think the Aboriginal elder is lying there doing nothing, his eyes are closed, but he's sending his attention up and down the song lines, he's controlling the rain. So when that ancestor dies, a huge storm goes up and down that song line. They're propagating longitudinal coherence along a magnetic line, and that's ancestor memory, right? So successful death is being able to sustain that propagation. Another example is the Sufi master's ability to be a Sufi master was defined in the movie Meetings with Remarkable Men, by which one could make a successful echo. A successful echo is the name of the physics of successful death, because your magnetic node can propagate continuously if you can ring the bell. And the guy that knew how to ring that bell, and by the way, not one of them would ever try doing it from inside a metal building. So don't bother trying to die in a hospital if you wanted to be successful. Okay.
So successful death means that you merge consciously with you become the longitudinal wave, and
You become a longitudinal array.
Okay.
A fractal array of longitudinal nodes, if it's big enough and coherent enough, is absolutely mindful. In fact, it is the definition of mind, that centripetal force.
And do you then get off the karmic cycle by having that happen?
Well, at that point, when we say I want to be free, what you actually mean is you want to be able to charge distribute. And if you want to be able to charge distribute, then you understand perfectly well that you better have the map of your backyard and your bed and your town be a fractal, or you ain't going to get there. Prague is magnetically a rose for a reason.
All right. So this is a lot to take in, but I think it's great. I think you should keep going, and then we'll do a refresher course with Portal to Ascension. But okay,
next lifetime. No.
Next week, maybe.
No. So all we're saying here is, dear physicists, no one will accept your answer that it could be a coincidence that 3 hydrogen radii are precisely golden ratio exponents of Planck. So you must deal with my answer, which is it's this golden ratio conjugation of phases, which is the reason hydrogen makes gravity. Okay, so I invented the equation to predict the geometry of hydrogen radii. Right here, it's in front of you. And then we published that in the graph that you see, General Science Journal publications, compression of hydrogen journal phase conjugation. And the follow-up publication is how that is the cause of gravity.
Wait, that's you saying hydrogen makes gravity? Doesn't that change everything we know in physics?
Yes, absolutely, everything. In fact, it makes all these physicists talking about dark matter look like stupid idiots. I'm sorry to say it undiplomatically, because the only reason they're talking about dark matter is because there's more gravity around they can explain, because they don't know if fractality causes gravity. So once you understand the masses of the universe are arranged dodecahedrally, of course it makes more gravity than they can explain, because they don't know that fractality causes gravity. So since they don't know the cause of gravity, they don't know why there's extra gravity, so they call that dark matter, and they're idiots. But
right, it's like junk DNA. It's like we don't know what that DNA is. It must be junk. We can't measure the extra gravity. So
that's right. The junk DNA is the spacer that allows braiding. That's what it is, the structural.
Right.
So anyway,
right. But that's huge, Dan. You should win the Nobel Prize in Physics for discovering that.
Absolutely. I mean, not only did I predict, I was the first one to prove the way hydrogen is fractal, but I was the first one to prove the cause of gravity. Absolutely. I answered the question why an object falls to the ground, which had not been done yet.
If you can prove the cause of gravity, then you can create anti-gravity waves as well, right?
That's where this lecture is going toward propulsion. But by the way, we already published the paper on the cause of fractality, the cause of gravity, and we can publish papers all day on this. But it's sort of like when I wrote my book on origin of negentropy, everyone yawned. But then I built a gadget that caused negentropy, and suddenly we're in 25 countries. You see, so we're not going to be publishing about how to make gravity. We're going to make gravity. That's what we're going to do.
Right. Okay,
but anyway, so this is what I do with my equation. If you take my equation for origin of negentropy, Planck length times golden ratio to the integer n, whole number multiples of golden ratio times Planck equals 3 exact radii of hydrogen. The ADP, the most important molecule in the body, it's the only 2 frequencies of photosynthesis. It predicts all of sacred dimension. The British foot is exactly. It predicts the Schumann harmonics, the brainwave harmonics, the alpha. It predicts heart rate variability is most important. Mayer wave, 0.1 hertz, most important frequency in the blood. It predicts the Venus year, the Earth year, the galactic year, and the precessional year. So all of these things are on the line, which is named origin of biologic negentropy, because they're exactly golden ratio exponents of Planck. Pure phase conjugate charge implosion is the origin of self-organization.
What someone asks, if we drink hydrogen water, will we have a generating effect on the internal organs?
Monoatomic hydrogen and nanohydrogen in water is fabulously healing, and it's famous in Japan for spa industries, etc. Of course it is, yes. And if you stick monoatomic hydrogen inside a clathrate water, it's a microhydrogen. So this is one of the 2 early publications on this physics, if you want the physics literature that we published. And this is really Tom Bearden's background to all of this book I showed you, Gravitobiology, where he actually writes the equations. proving how gravity waves are actually longitudinal. And also this is a background on the Priory plasma device, which healed thousands of cancers in France, but no one understood how it worked until I wrote my new equation. And then we turned that into Therify, and we're in 25 countries. This is this paper I worked, the symptoms of Einstein-induced insanity. So those who don't know why objects fall to the ground, it's called Einstein-induced insanity. And we explain the cause of gravity. It's this fractal recursion. And thinking the speed of light is the speed limit, thinking it takes infinite energy to go through the speed of light, thinking all action at a distance is spooky, not having a clue what the ether is made of, it's compressible superfluid named charge, incorrectly and weirdly believing space-time is somehow bent. In fact, it's not. What's meant is the charge wave propagation wave front, and thinking, for example, that, or not understanding that time and mass are only defined by charge rotation. So for example, the reason clock speed up, once you know that time is only spin rate, you understand exactly why clocks speed up when you accelerate.
Oh, can I just ask you, someone asked, how do we get monatomic hydrogen water? How would we get that?
There are lots of devices that make nanohydrogen. Nanohydrogen bubblers are famous in Japan for the spa industry because they're so profoundly healing. Unfortunately, right now, that technology is expensive, but it's getting better. And if you use theimploder.com, you go a long way in that direction, a lot cheaper than the Japanese technology, our vortex tech, which we'll have some pictures of in a moment. This is pictures
actually, okay, I'm sorry, but how much longer? I mean, I didn't realize but tell me, how much longer do you need to complete everything?
You know what? Why don't we just do it like about another 5 minutes and then stop? That's my suggestion, because my
okay,
that works.
Okay, but I mean, you teach for hours and days and weeks, but so okay, 5 minutes. I guess that's great because this is so amazing. So go ahead.
So, I mean, when Schauberger first discovered that the moment his vortex here started to make voltage from gravity was the moment it spontaneously got colder, was the definition and proof of the origin of negentropy. That ability for that tip of that vortex to get colder means it's self-organizing. The same reason the tip of the Therify plasma tubes do that. Other examples here would be the Joe Newman. This is a monatomic hydrogen generator here, actually, the Newman device, and you can run a car on this imploded hydrogen. I would just like to drop a little hint here. This is Keshe rotating nanomaterials inside ping pong balls, and at one point you can see his car floating. So, of course, he didn't have the skill to understand the physics at all, and also doesn't have the first clue on how to make nanomaterials pure enough. Our group can make them 99% pure, which is what you need, and you do thousands of tons a month. It's amazing. But when you rotate a conjugator, you produce energy and gravity. This is the end of every energy and transportation technology on this planet, is the most disruptive technology that ever hit this planet, which is rotating conjugators. Carbon nano is just the beginning. And so once we begin to understand the negentropy of fullerenes, these carbon nanomaterials. So this is about how Townsend Brown's device floated, how it made gravity. This is the Searle. Notice that the Searle device actually has alternate rotating magnetics, and it's not a flat plane, it's in a cone. And all it's doing is generating a high voltage, which is applied to that surface. And that high voltage itself is making the gravity. This is the zero-point energy device that I worked on for years with Bruce De Palma and Tom Malone. It's called the Faraday disk homopolar generator. And the physics of why that makes energy from gravity was part of the lecture here. We're not going to do all these. And the same thing about the rotating magnetics that Ed Leeds-Scanlon used to make the gravity to lift the stones at Coral Castle, 12 magnetics around a rotating array. And these are more pictures of the Hannibal Vimana Nazi bell.
Choosing compassion carefully aligns the magnetic field donuts around the heart so that nest dodeca icasa perfect embedding, self not self, squirting pineal pine cone through the speed of light into time, intent creates the future, and revolving that spin path to 0 point in the blood, we get the Holy Grail, which has no inside or outside, solves the problem of separateness, contains self embeds the Sufi heart within heart, feminine reproductive organs, Into that 3D fractal you can zoom in forever and always see the same thing. Heart within heart, perfectly self-contained, self-embedded compassion.
Beautiful, beautiful. That is beautiful. Yeah.
There's a lot more animations in this series, and many of your friends have seen them already. This is just a golden ratio nest of sine waves. And this is that same nest of sine waves here. This is, I call this the Sushin zoom into. This is what you get when you zoom in a dodecahedron. I think on that note, I think we're probably out of time here.
Yeah, but could you give a weekend course on Portal to Ascension? I mean, it's up to Neil, of course, but I think this would be great to go deep into.
Yeah, I think what we should do is talk about how the relationship of diet, hygiene, and environment to creating that coherence in your aura, which is actually what Ascension is, that densification when the harmonics are superposed, and also then introduction to the physics of Kundalini, which is an extension of bliss science. We could have some fun. I'm open to that.
Wow. Okay, you want to just take off your screen sharing for a second, but it's great. Just so we, wow, Dan, this it's so stimulating mentally that it starts to affect the body as well. Actually, start to actually induce the hyperdimensional longitudinal plasma effects within the DNA. I think by talking about it. So, how can people find you? And how can people find you and go deeper into this?
Fractalfield.com, email info@fractalfield.com, and our plasma tech, therify.net.
Wow. Thanks so much. I'm coming back for a visit, okay? At some point.
Love to see you, Alan. You take care. Yeah. Blessings.
But I just want to say, you just laid out the science of ascension on a biological physics level. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Blessings.